duplicate these. For example, I'll click on one in the project window here and hit Command D, and that will duplicate it. Now I have a copy of that first one, and then I can go in and edit the text. But we'll get into that in just a second. I just wanted to show you this is set up. They're all on alpha channels, but you can also drop in your images or video into these compositions and render the lower thirds right over top if that's what you opt to do. Either way, it'll work. If you're going to render them out with an alpha channel, just make sure that you render a codec and a file that supports an alpha channel for your video project. So then you can then import those graphics into Final Cut or Premiere or whatever video editing software that you're using. So those are the lower thirds, and then we have our Mortis, same concept. Mortis graphic here with customizable text. And then our transitions and our looping backgrounds. So we'll come back to that as well in a second. I just wanted to show you the overall structure of the project file. So going back to the intro and the open, the first folder here, insert our soundtrack. So this composition we open up, it's 2 minutes long to match the length of our overall animation. And this is basically as straightforward as dropping in the music track that we plan on using for the project. So you import your music and you drop it into this composition, and it automatically inserts itself into the master composition. So that was easy. Moving on to step 2 is where we insert our footage or our images, whatever we're going to use for our intro animation. Now, if we open up placeholder 1, I currently have some images imported here. They're just stock images from Shutterstock.com. I might create a link to these if I'm able to. I'm not sure if I can, but these photos were purchased from Shutterstock.com. So if you're looking for these particular photos, that's where you can find them. So anyway, basically all we have are images, and I just added some simple scale and position movements to these images. These images will not be included in your project file because obviously I cannot include them. I do not own them. So let me show you what it will look like. When you open up this placeholder 1, you're going to have a blank screen. And all you do is you import your images or your video, whatever it is. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to import, let's see. I'm going to import, footage. Let's see. What do I got? No. It won't exactly be wedding related, but just to show you, and maybe this is wedding related. Maybe this is the bride trying to get to the reception in a taxi. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so we just imported a piece of video and dropped it in to the bottom layer of our placeholder 1 composition. On top of here, we have a vignette. And a vignette is just a shadowy edge to kind of draw your attention to the center of the screen. It's kind of a design element that I use in a lot of my graphics. If we open up this comp, all you can see is basically it's just a black solid with a feathered mask on it. If I hit the M key, I can show you, you can see the mask attributes, and it's feathered to 400 pixels. So going back to our placeholder 1 comp, we've dropped in our footage, and now we have our video in here. Now you can edit your sequences in each one of these placeholders. So say, for example, you dropped your video in, but you need to edit in another clip for this sequence. So we'll go to our shot at the beach. And so we have our city scene, and now we got a fade. Do a 1 second fade here to our beach scene, and all I'm doing is animating the opacity from 0 to 100, and this is how we create a sequence within these compositions. Each one of these placeholder comps is 30 seconds long, so you can edit like little individual sequences using your footage or your images in these compositions. And we'll see how this all comes together in just a second. So moving forward, just to show you placeholder 2 through 10, it's all the same. It's the same concept. I just have images dropped in right now. Of course, these will all be blank because the project will not contain the photos. But in the setup folder is where that vignette lives. If you don't want to use the vignette in any of your placeholders, the easiest thing to do would just be to turn off the vignette layer, and it will not appear in any of these placeholder comps. But you could also edit this vignette if you wanted it to be darker or a different color. You can add a tint effect to this, whatever you want. Okay, so those are the placeholders. Very easy. Just remember the placeholders are where we add our images or video to the composition and edit it within there. Moving forward, edit the text and titles. Now, again, we have 10 text title placeholders in here, and these all correspond to each other. So placeholder 1 corresponds to text title 1, placeholder 2 to text and title 2, and so on. So whatever text you add into number 1 is going to show up over top of placeholder 1 in the master composition. But first of all, let me show you, open up this text title 1 and show you that inside of here, if I turn on the alpha channel, you can see we have 2 text layers, custom title layer, which is actually optional, or the subtitle content area for additional text. Now, all of this text is optional. You do not have to use it if you do not want to. You can turn it off either here or in the master composition, and I'll show you how to do that. But really all you need to do here is edit the text. You hit the Command T tool or go up to your type tool here, and you can click on this or double click and type in whatever you want, or you can type in somebody's name. For example, I don't know, let's say Suzanne Summers is getting married, and or actually Suzanne Summers is the maid of honor. How about that? So that's how you would update the text. And of course, like I said, this is all optional. You do not have to use all of them, or you can opt to use none of them. You know, you can use some, whatever you want to do. The other element in here is the divider thread that I have between the 2 layers of text. You can turn that on or off if you would like to. And again, this all animates onto the screen. All I did there to show the keyframes was I selected all the layers and hit the U key to show all the keyframes. And it animates on using the tracking amount. And I have a fast blur on these layers that animates from 40 to 0 pixels to, or I'm sorry, 0.2 pixels to kind of blur the text in as it's animating onto the screen. It also fades up opacity from 0 to 100%. So that is the text customization. Really simple. Text 1 through 10 are all the same, and remember, each number corresponds to each other, so placeholder 1 corresponds to text 1, and so on. Now, creating our Mortise graphics. If we open up that folder, we see 2 more folders. Number 1 is the Mortise builds, and this is where the actual meat of the design comes in. And what I mean by that is where all of our edge graphics come into play. And in each one of these compositions, like for example, it's descriptive of what it is. So if it's Mortise bottom, the graphics lay along the bottom. If it's bottom left, the graphics lay along the bottom left. If it's bottom right, the graphics lay along the bottom right. That is correct. Mortise top, can you guess where those graphics lay? Across the top. You're right. You're absolutely correct. So each composition is named for where the graphics lay in the frame of the screen. So basically, you have 8 different options, and it covers all corners and all sides of the screen. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to that in a second. But just to show you how these are all built, even though they're all different, they're based on the same type of animation. They just basically slide onto the screen from off the screen, and they're all controlled using these layers. So to reposition them, like say for example you wanted to reposition where this one lands, so you would position your playhead at the final keyframe of that layer and double click on that mask, and then you can move this, say around. Say you wanted your Mortise to look more like that, you could have your mask animate on so that it ends right there. Now, there's in each one of these Mortise build compositions, there's a lot of hidden layers. So if I toggle this hide all shy layers button, you'll see there's actually a lot more layers in here. This is all controlled through expressions, which have been universalized, so you should not have any issues with the expressions if you are using a different language version of After Effects that is not English. Hopefully you don't have any issues with the expressions there. But that's how you could update or create or customize different Mortise builds. You could also create your own. Say, for example, if we wanted to create our own, we could duplicate this, call it, say, custom, and you could use these keyframes and position the masks around to create whatever position you want. So once we have that figured out, and again, you don't really have to do anything with these comps. They're there. You can edit them if you want, but you don't have to if you don't want to. The next folder, number 2, graphic overlays. We'll open up the first one, graphic and title overlay 1. And as you can see, what we have here is our text and title number 1. Like I said, text and title 1 corresponds to graphic overlay and placeholder 1. Same thing happens here for 1 through 10. So number 1 in the placeholders and number 1 in the text corresponds directly and compiles into graphic and title overlay 1. And that is within our graphic overlays folder. So like I was saying, you don't have to use the titles if you don't want to. You can just come into these overlay compositions and turn the title layer off, and you no longer have a title layer if you don't want to use it. The other thing that you can customize is the position of and the usage of your Mortise layers or Mortise graphics. So if for placeholder 1, if we didn't want the bottom left Mortise, we could click on that layer and then go back up here to our Mortise builds and pick a different one. So if we needed one that was actually more on the right side, we would click and hold on that layer, hold down the Alt or Option key, and drop it right over top of that layer, and voila, we have a different placement of our Mortise graphics. So depending on the composition of your images or your footage, if you had most of your concentration in the composition in this side of the screen, maybe you want your graphics to lay on this side of the screen. It'll all depend on whatever kind of content you insert into the project. So those are your graphic overlays. This is where you would decide to use or not use the text, and this is where you can customize the position of your Mortise. Now, again, if I go back actually and change that again to the right side, you can see our particles actually still come from the bottom left of the screen. If you go to our particles corner layer here and hit the S key to show the scale, if we unlink the height and width scales and make this first number, which is width, negative, that now switches to the other side of the screen. So by changing the values of this scale, you could actually position this graphic in any corner of the screen. So there we go. That's how you do that too. Okay, so now that you know how to customize your graphic overlays, we will move on to the customize the scenes. And again, we have 10 more scenes. So we've compiled. If we go back to our Title 1 overlay, you can see we have our title and our Mortise and our placeholder. So this is where our placeholder comes in. And it's all compiled into one scene. 1 through 10 again, same deal. But this time we have an intro and an end tag, an ending animation. If we open up the scene 00 intro composition, we can see that it's basically just a title and a subtitle, and then we have a short transition that goes to the bride name and the groom name. Again, another optional thing that you don't necessarily have to use, but this intro graphic is there if needed. So to customize this content, you go to your setup folder here, and in the intro titles, The intro background image slash video. That is this background image. Again, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you wanted to drop in an image or some video, this is where you would place it. Of course, yours will be blank. It'll look like this. So just drop in your video or your images, whatever you plan on using in the background, if you'd like to use that. Then, of course, the text main title. This is the custom title. And the font I'm using actually is a Minion. That is not a free font. That is a font that you would have to purchase. The reason I did not use a free font is because everyone probably has a nice, elegant serif font to use. So I wasn't going to go crazy trying to find some, awesome free font for you to use, because chances are you probably have something, nice and elegant to use already. But again, same deal here. All you have to do is, double click on the layers with your text tool and, customize the title to whatever you want. So that's the main title. And again, the bride and groom names have a huge ampersand layer in the back here, and then the bride name and the groom name. And you can update all of that with whatever font and text you want. And of course, this other layer here is the particle burst. That's just a reuse of one of our transitions that we built for the supplemental graphics. You can change that animation, that transition to a different one if you'd like. All right, the ending titles. We'll open up our ending. Same concept as the intro, except all the ending is a quick, end title. I currently have it saying the end. Very creative, I know. But that's what the ending is. And all of these compositions come together into the compile animation folder. And this is what we boil down all of these compositions into. Everything we just updated in steps 1 through 5 now come together in the Ivory Wedding master composition. Now, if we open this up so you can see it. As you can see, we have our scene 1 intro layer, because that's what we begin the animation with. So we have our title and then our bride and groom name. I'm actually going to turn this down a quarter, speed up the rendering a little bit. I'm also starting the intro with our transition number 2, our particle burst transition. And then these other layers. So all of these green layers that you see are the scene layers. So scene 1 through 10. Those are the scenes that we compiled using our Mortis graphics and our titles and our placeholders. Each one is roughly, 10 seconds to 22 seconds. Each one is roughly about 10 to 12 seconds long right now. So if you needed one of these to be longer, all you would do, or shorter for that matter, if you needed it to be shorter, you would just basically shorten the length of the comp, and then you would just have to, readjust your layers accordingly so that they transition at the right times. Again, if you needed this one longer, like say you had a really long edit in one of these scenes, you would just, slide your layers around to retime everything accordingly. Just keep in mind that these layers are kind of grouped a little bit because there's a blur fade transition, and if I open up this comp, you're not going to see anything because all it is the fast blur effect that goes from 0 to 80 back to 0. And since you don't see anything is because the reason is because it's an adjustment layer that is blurring everything underneath it. So wherever you position these red layers is what it is going to be blurred underneath. So we go from, nice and crisp image to more and more blurry, and then transition to the next scene. It's just something that helps along the transition to the subsequent scene that happens after it. And again, on top, these orange layers are all of the transition builds that we created for our supplemental graphics, and we have our light sweep and our particle burst and our fan wipe, and we'll get into those in just a second. But as you can see in this composition, we have our soundtrack layer that we inserted our soundtrack into. We can fade it out here like I have at the end. I have the audio faded out at the end. The other thing we have is a black fade out. It just goes from 0 to 100 opacity and basically makes the screen dark. If you did not want it to fade out, you would just basically turn that layer off. And then again, we have our ending as our final scene here. And overall, the animation is 2 minutes long. You do not have to have it be two minutes long. That might be kind of long for some presentations, or it may not be long enough. If it's not long enough, you'll just have to extend certain comps here and there, like the soundtrack comp, make it longer, however long you needed. But say, for example, you only needed it to be a minute long. You could easily delete these layers and just use maybe scenes, 1 through 5 or however many you needed based on the edits that you would need to do. So that's how you compile the intro animation. Pretty straightforward, not very complicated, but that's that. So we'll move on to the supplemental graphics. Or actually, before we do that, sorry, we're going to go to our last folder here, step 7, render the animation. And in this composition, we have 3 different choices depending on the resolution we need. HD 720, HD 1080, and widescreen, which is what WS is, 480. So depending on the resolution needs, if we were going to play this on the web or if we were creating a high-definition DVD, like a Blu-ray DVD for our client who, we did the wedding production for, you might want to go with the HD 1080 version. If I open up this comp here, 1920 by 1080, and then we have an HD 720 comp, and then a widescreen 864 by 480 comp as well. So more of a standard definition, but still widescreen format. So you just choose your resolution, and you render out the intro animation from there. Just drop it into your render queue. All right. Now, moving on to the supplemental graphics. We already covered what was in here. I'll just show you how to quickly customize all of this stuff. So we'll open up lower third, one line, and as you can see, we have our, I'm just going to delete that since it won't be there. We have a white glow layer here that sort of holds out the corner from the background, and then we have the actual build of our lower third graphics, which is really just comprised of a few masks. Pretty straightforward build, nothing too complicated, but nice and elegant, stays out of the way of the beautiful wedding footage that you shot. So if I wanted to customize the text of these lower thirds, within the setup folder, if we open that up, we can see we have our lower third text 1, lower third text 2, and lower third text corner. And we'll open up lower third text 1, since that's the one line we're working with, and turn on the alpha channel to see that's where our one line lower third is. New lower third title. So if I customize that text and go back to our one line lower third, now you can see we have our new lower third title. Now, same thing applies for the 2 line and the corner lower thirds, but what if we needed more than one lower third? All right, well, I'm just going to rename this real quick. One line number 1, or I'll actually name it 01. If, say, we had 5 different names of 5 different people that we needed to display, I'm going to rename this 1, and I'm going to duplicate it by hitting Command D, as in dog, and we'll duplicate that to 5. Now we have 5 different lower thirds. The other thing we're going to have to do is, I will actually do this, 2 line. I will have to update this in the project file quickly. I'm going to rename this lower third text 1 line 01, and I'll duplicate that 5 times. And so I'll open up the number 2, since that's the new one that we created. I'll just add number 2 so you can see here, and number 3, and number 4, and number 5. Oh. Okay. So now we have our new lower third text, our one-line text setup, and actually I'll add number 1 to this so you can see. We have 1 through 5 set up. We're going to have to drop that new text into our new lower thirds as well. Now we don't have to update lower third one line 1 because that was already created. If we go to lower third one line number 2, it still says number 1, so we have to change that to our new number 2. So we'll click on the layer that we need to update, which is this green layer on the top here. We'll go up to our new lower third text. We're going to hold down the Alt or Option key, depending if you're on a Mac or PC. Click and drag over top of that layer in our comp window, and now you can see that's updated to number 2. Same thing applies for the rest of these. For number 3, we drag and drop number 3 over top, and so on. That's how we add new lower thirds to our project. And that's basically it. Your 2-line is the same concept. It just has an additional line here for another line of lower third text if you would need it. Again, these images will not be included. And then the lower third graphic, which comes up from the bottom left corner, which would serve fairly well as a corner bug holdout if you needed it, or it's sort of a lower third with less of a footprint. It's not as intrusive. It doesn't have the bar going across, but it still holds out the text over top so that you can read it. All right, so those are the lower thirds. The mortise is basically the same thing as the mortises we created for our intro animation, except this one is just custom built for use with the project. So if you just needed a graphic to frame some video that you were editing in your sequence, this is where you could do that. And updating the text is the same process as our lower thirds. All we have to do, oops, I'm in the transitions folder. All we have to do is open up the setup folder in the mortises folder, and of course, we open up text, and there we go. We have our text that we can customize. And if we needed more than one mortise, again, same duplication process as we did with the lower thirds. Now, the mortise image video, you can either drop the video or image into the bottom of this composition, or you can drop it into this image video if you wanted to edit the sequence within here. Really, same thing, doesn't really matter, just personal preference depending on what you want to do. Moving on to the transitions. Transition 1 is just a light sweep. As you can see, we have an alpha channel here. Light sweep. Have a short range of full frame files here where you can do your transition under. So this is 2 seconds long. It's a nice pace transition for this type of project. Number 2 is a particle burst, kind of a light burst, and then you have particles that are sort of left behind. That is just over 3 seconds long. And then the transition 3 is more of a fan wipe, which uses our clean background and a matte to create a wipe that goes from one corner to the other. Just kind of a full screen wipe, more of a graphical wipe as opposed to using lights and particles. So those are the different transitions that you can render out with alpha channels to use within your video project. Okay, those are transitions. Moving on to the backgrounds, real simple. Clean background, these are all loops. So if I go to the first frame and the last frame, as you can see, they, that does not loop. I'm going to have to fix that. Let's see, particle background loop. All right, now it should be fixed. Okay, I'm gonna have to update that. As you can see, if I toggle between the first and last frames, this file will loop seamlessly. So you can render these background graphics out as loops. They'll create 30-second loops that you can use in your project as well to place, images, text, whatever over top of here. I also have a specific background built for text. This has a text panel on it with live text that you can customize if you'd like. You can turn this off and add it and render it just like this, clean, and you can import this into your video editing software and add your own text in there if you would like. And then the background, the video background, I'm sorry. This is basically just a background with a video window cut into it so that you can render this background out with an alpha channel and import it into your video editing software to edit video within that window if you'd like. As you can see, I have just a photo in here that sort of slowly scales over time, and you can add text or photos, do like a credit scroll here if you would like, or guests of the wedding have the names scrolling on the side here of who attended the wedding. just a few ideas to do with this project. Again, they all create 30-second loops, so you can render these out to use however you like. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is Ivory Wedding. I think I covered everything. I don't think I missed anything important. But as always, if you have any questions or need help, please contact us on motionrevolver.com. We have a support page. You can fill out the form there and ask any questions, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Once again, thank you very much for purchasing Ivory Wedding. I think it's a very versatile project. The design is timeless and elegant and clean, and I think whatever wedding project you decide to use it for, your clients will be very happy with the extra mile that you went to include graphics in the project. So thank you again for your purchase, and good luck with the project.